I'm Stu Davies, ocean caring digital strategist. This podcast dives into the real stories behind ocean caring brands, organizations, and ocean tech innovators. Welcome to A Drop in the Ocean. Each episode explores the wins, challenges, and lived experiences of people working to protect our seas, from grassroots campaigners to global initiatives, and from early stage ocean tech to large scale conservation programs. But this is more than just storytelling. Along the way, we'll also connect these change makers with experts in marketing, communications, AI, storytelling, and strategy, sharing practical insights to help all of us amplify our impact. One drop in the ocean becomes many. Let's make some waves together. And welcome to another episode of A Drop in the Ocean. Today, I've been really looking forward to this episode. So it is actually the last episode in this current series, and we've got a fabulous guest for it. We've got Alyx Elliott. So Alyx, I would describe as a campaigning strategist. She's got an academic background in ethics. She's been a campaigner for 20 years, working for several different charities, including Oceana, World Animal Protection, Kinship, I4, and Humane World for Animals. She's led teams campaigning against oil and gas, ghost fishing gear, overfishing and bottom trawling, amongst many other non-marine campaigns. Alyx, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Stu. It's great to be here.
Great to have you as a guest. So, Alyx, I always ambush my guests with a question I haven't sent them. So this is it. So what I'd like you to share with us and our audience is your fondest memory of the ocean, please.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a bit headfirst deep, this one, but I was lucky enough to go to Hawaii about a decade ago and went snorkeling off the coast of Kauai and found myself on my own, relatively far out from the beach. I'd actually just been through a really terrible tragedy in my life. We'd lost our first child, and we'd gone to Hawaii to escape it all. And when I was out there on my own, I was suddenly surrounded by the most beautiful, half a dozen huge turtles just swimming around me. Incredibly peaceful, incredibly beautiful moment. And it actually reminded me of, it sounds a little bit deep for the first question, but the beauty of the world. And in a very dark moment in my life, it really inspired me. And it's a moment that will all stay with me.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing that beautiful moment and a poignant moment in your life. So, Alyx, I'm just going to chat through your journey a little bit. What first drew you to campaigning as a career?
I don't think I had another choice, to be honest. I think I was born this way, in a way. I'm very, very passionate about protecting animals and very drawn to animals as a young child, to nature generally. I learned to swim very, very young and was snorkeling very young. And I think I was always in awe of sort of the natural world around us. But as I grew older, I obviously became more aware of the injustices of the world, not just relating to nature and the environment, but to other people and many other issues. And as I got older, I got more involved with charities and volunteering. I studied ethics at uni, as you mentioned, and that just really fired my passion, but also sort of professionalized it in a way and gave me a way to channel it. And when I left uni, I didn't have a choice. It was campaigning. As soon as I knew that was actually a thing and you could get paid to do it, that was me. So applied for a campaigns officer role at an animal welfare charity and got it, and I've never looked back.
Brilliant. And at what point did you've been very heavily involved with ocean and marine organisations? At what point did that become a focus for you?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've always been a water baby, so it's always been a passion of mine and something I wanted to do. But I didn't really get the chance until I worked on a ghost fishing gear campaign, which was, a good 10, 15 years ago now, I think. and just so delighted to work on it finally. And I'm also a scuba diver. I was involved with like Paddy Aware and all of that sort of side of things, more as a volunteer. But yeah, I always knew I wanted to work on that, and then I obviously got the chance to work at Oceana, which was a fantastic experience of just being able to focus purely on marine issues.
So, you spent several years helping build Oceana UK's campaigning capability. What did that experience teach you about running impactful campaigns?
I think the number one thing it taught me was the importance of recruiting the right people, which sounds a little bit sort of administrative in a way. But, really making sure that not just the campaigns team, but the entire team really fit together and was a level of excellence that we knew we needed to deliver on the issues we cared about. We really took our time and were very deliberate about how and who we recruited for that team. I think the only other thing I would say, and this is just because of experience of working in multiple organizations, is that every place seems to have a slightly different definition of what campaigning is. And it's really important whenever you join somewhere, or even if you've just never asked the question, to really understand what that is and what expectations are from within the organization, because they were different at Oceana as they are everywhere. So that's also something that over time you only really learn from experience, but I definitely explored more when I was there.
Yeah, okay. And now you're a freelance campaign strategist. What are you up to now, Alyx? How do you help organisations, and who do you help now?
Yeah, I have been since the beginning of the year, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm really getting to focus on the things that I know that I love and that I'm good at, which is working out from the very beginning, or even refreshing your campaign strategy, but really starting from scratch and saying, right, what is it the change you want to make, and how do I get you to a point where you get there? And quite often I've found that I'm being approached by organisations who, they have a solid campaigns team in place, but they just don't have the headspace to step back and do that, or they feel like they have to facilitate it as well as do the work. And what I am doing is going in and really providing them with that headspace, but also some really constructive challenge as an outside point of view, and say, have you thought of this? Is that really going to join up to what you want in the end? And really asking those tough questions, but in a really sort of positive and team building way. I'm really enjoying it. I'm getting to work with a load of different organisations, including marine ones. So that's fantastic for me as well.
So, often from the outside, campaigning can look quite fast, but meaningful change takes years. Why is persistence so important?
Because, what you're often seeing, when you say campaigning is fast, that's very often the very end of the campaign, or just a big moment within the campaign. But, change doesn't happen without people fighting for it. And there's a very natural resistance to change. So you've got to have an acknowledgement from the very beginning that most campaigns are a long game, and you have to be in the fight for it. You have to be up for being persistent, for not giving up, because ultimately that's what the resistance is trying to do, is to get you to give up, and they're just saying no. Campaigning is all about finding different ways in, being persistent, never giving up, and really channeling your passion and keep going until you get what you need to get to.
So stoicism.
Absolutely.
Would be
you've got to have thick skin and determination. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
And relentlessness.
Absolutely. Yeah. All campaigners need that.
Yeah, and what does it actually take to keep an organisation focused on a campaign over multiple years?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It really does, in my experience, it differs from place to place. A lot of it is dependent on the leadership and how patient they are and what their expectations are. So there can be, in certain organisations, a lot of managing upwards in terms of trying to manage those expectations and be realistic. You can't plan 10 years ahead. You don't know what the context you're going to be operating is then. But an awareness that things could take that long or even longer is really important, to be realistic and to make sure you've got all the resources and support in place. So it's very dependent on the issue, but I think ultimately it can fall down when you don't have leadership that really acknowledge the reality of campaigning.
to that senior stakeholder buy-in.
Absolutely.
The understanding that it's not a flash in the pan activity. This is something that's going to go on and on and on, and needs to go on and on and on to be visible, to be there.
And to be meaningful in the long term, to not just be a sort of shallow win, but actually to know you've embedded the win and the change in whatever forum you're doing it in. Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So was there a campaign moment where you saw strategy really work, where you knew something had shifted?
Yeah, there's been a few times like that. I think the obvious ones are kind of, when you get a piece of legislation over the line, or you get a minister committing to do something. And I have been lucky enough to be part of those times. One of the most recent ones was with bottom trawling, actually, and the then DEFRA minister, Steve Reed, after a lot of pressure, and the Attenborough film came out, and an awful lot of campaigning from Oceana and many other organisations came out and said that Labour was going to ban bottom trawling in UK seas, and that was a huge moment. Of course, we're now in a place where it's like, have you done it? What's happening? and that's why I'm saying that there are, like, it's very rare to get a moment where you think, oh, we've done it. We've actually completely done it. And they do come along, of course they do. But I think being a campaigner, there's always an awareness of there's sort of steps of progress, but there's still work to do. And the strategy absolutely is working, or it's not. And we have to adapt and move and make sure it fits where we need to go now. But yeah, across many different issues, I've been lucky enough to have lots of those moments, and you absolutely have to celebrate them, because they are change, they are progress, but they are hard fought. They're really hard fought.
And if it's political change, then it's important that we hold the politicians to account. I know with my sort of campaigning for Surfers Against Sewage, campaign success for manifesto promises hasn't necessarily lined up with action in legislation. So
yeah, and even beyond that, enforcement, actual action out in the ocean. Are they? What's happening to the seabed? What's happening to the people using the sea, or the animals living within it? Like, how can we monitor it and that impact? Yeah. So you have to see it through right to the end, and then beyond. Make sure it hasn't backtracked. It's not often talked about, but it's real. Otherwise, your success can be really short-lived.
Yeah, no, and I suppose that's a lesson for many campaigners: is what's your follow through? Who is going to enforce bottom trawling? How is that measured? Who's going to keep an eye on it? And who's going to stop people from not doing it? Who holds the politicians to account when they weaken down the legislation? So
exactly. And is there appetite in the organisation to keep an eye on it once we've had that win? Or do they want to move on to something new? So all of these things, you really need to have deep conversations about, like, that long haul and what it actually means for meaningful change.
It's all about that upfront planning strategy.
Those conversations are super important.
Great. So we're going to take a quick break there. In part 2, we're going to come back and we're going to deep dive into campaign strategy. So we'll see you in a couple of minutes. You're listening to A Drop in the Ocean, the podcast that brings together ocean changemakers and digital experts, helping us all amplify our impact. If you're listening to this and thinking, we're doing important work, but our digital strategy just isn't quite landing, that's exactly what I help you with. Find me at stu-davies.com. And welcome back to the second half of A Drop in the Ocean. So this is, sadly, the last episode in the first series, but there will be another series. I've got my guest today, campaigning strategist Alyx Elliott. Alyx, welcome back.
Thanks, Stu. Good to be here.
So, Alyx, we're going to deep dive into campaign strategy. A lot of our audience are working on campaigns. They're campaigners, or they're working with organisations, or who are doing campaigns, or they're marketers who are planning their own campaigns. So we're going to start with focus and relentlessness. So I used that word before. So you said campaigns need to be focused and relentless. What does that actually look like in practice?
Yeah, sure. So when I say focus, I mean, it's really not getting distracted, really being very, very clear about your goals, what issues you're working on, and not being tempted to try and do everything. It is super tempting when you're passionate to say yes to requests to work on all sorts of issues, and that happened at Oceana. It happens all the time, wherever you work. But all it does is spread you too thinly, and maybe it sounds like an obvious point. It probably applies to a lot of different roles, but all it does is take away time and resource from what it is you're trying to achieve, and you've already got a huge enough load on your shoulders in terms of what you're trying to win. So it's really tempting, and it's hard to say no, but it's super important for campaigners. In terms of being relentless, that's kind of, we touched on this earlier, but it's you basically just don't ever shut up about it. You just keep going on and on at each and every opportunity. You have to obviously have a degree of common sense around that, but at the same time, what you're aiming to do is to normalize what you're talking about. It's about making this part of you're not going to convince everybody, but the people who you do need to convince, you need to normalize it for them. You need to make it something that you talk about even when you're not in the room. And the only way you do that, and there's a lot of studies around this with anything, and it's how big brands work as well, it's just being there in your face over and over again, so it just becomes part of normal daily life. And the same is absolutely true for the issues we're campaigning on.
Very wisely said. So I've worked with a couple of organisations and around strategy, and some of my observations were, you're trying to do too many things. Your focus is stretched. Your media channels are confused. You're trying to reach that audience with this message and that audience with this message, and you've got one team who are putting it out on the same channels. And there was no governance. There was no, this is the important thing that we talk about. So that was my observation. But from your experience, why do organisations often struggle maintaining focus on a campaign long enough to get to that winning line?
Yeah, I think like you said, there's those organisations that can't focus just on, one or two or three issues. And that's definitely something that I would say sits with leadership. But also in terms of like focusing long enough, that's very specifically, I feel, to do with impatient leadership, but also impatient funders. There's often a kind of, we'll fund you for a year, 2 years, 3 years max. And there's a sort of, I guess, a feeling of, we better have achieved it all by then. Okay. Sometimes not, but sometimes so. But actually, there's a difference between slow progress and no progress. And actually, it's natural for campaigns to take a while to be meaningful, to really sit and be normalized with people. And I think that, there needs to be more recognition that campaigns do take a long time, and that doesn't mean that you're just kicking it into the long grass. It just means that the investment needs to be there for the long haul, both from funders and from CEOs and boards.
So that happens at the C-suite. That happens at those top level conversations when you're starting those campaigns. It's about the expectations of how and when this manifests. But it's interesting, funder pressure. Yeah. A funder's obviously putting a lot of money into it, and they're expecting these. How do we even have those conversations?
I think it's got to be, you've obviously, with a funder, you need to do like reporting back to them. And I think having really regular communication as much as you can, where you feel you can be really transparent about the ups and downs of the campaign, is so important. If you have clear indicators, or whatever you want to call them, targets in your campaign, and you're regularly, not just once a year, but like quarterly, for example, or twice a year, really able to sit down with them and feel like the relationship is trusted enough to be open about the challenges, then I think that will foster that trust and a recognition that it doesn't happen as quickly as they might like. I think, I'm not saying all funders are like that, of course, but I have experienced some that are. But I think that communication is fundamental, and really involving them in what's happening, and not just the good news, I think is super important.
Yeah. Okay. So transparency, regular communications, everyone's clear on how it's going to come across. So you talked about the importance of insights, both quantitative and qualitative. Could you give us some more information on that?
Yeah, of course. So. Insights, really, it's basically about understanding your audiences. It's basically going out and talking to people and understanding their perspective to inform your messaging and not just your messaging, but also to inform your strategy. Quantitative insights are basically polling. Everyone's familiar with, especially at the moment. I mean, with the local elections that are happening at the moment. We all see the polls that come out. Qualitative is much more like focus groups and one-on-one interviews and that kind of environment. I've again done quite a lot of this with different charities over time, and honestly, I've just seen how much it can transform your strategy or your messaging, simply because you need to understand who your audiences are, where they are in terms of your issue, and how to meet them there. I've done focus groups and polling before where there's even just an assumption about what a basic word means. We did some at Oceana that asked, what do you think when we say the word ocean or sea? And there was disagreement about whether it meant just the water or the water in the seabed or the animals in it or the coast and the people that used it. So even as a charity, when you're using the word ocean, it means different things to different people. And if there's disagreement there, then you're asking them to protect the ocean, people have very different understandings of what you're talking about. So even at a very basic level, and that's applied to lots of different issues that I've worked on, just having that understanding at a basic level like that, but right through to really detailed questions around the specific issue you're working on, whether they're outraged by it, whether they don't care about it, whether they could ever care about it, and what would make them actually take action. There's so many different things that you can ask people. And it really transforms any assumptions that you might have as a campaigner and as someone who's passionate about it already, to really understand who it is you're trying to change the mind of and how to go about doing that.
Yeah. Okay. Ask questions from real humans. Your AI bot is not going to be able to give you that level of insight. You've got to
definitely not. Definitely no AI bot.
Ask your audience.
Yeah, not your own assumptions either, which is super easy to do.
We're projecting outwards.
Exactly.
So, what does it really mean to really understand an audience when designing a campaign?
I think it's like I said, it's really meeting them where they are. And that might make you feel uncomfortable. You might not understand why they're there, but digging as far deep into that as you can and being really, really curious, I think is so important. And, there is a tendency which really sort of gets under my skin sometimes about talking about getting the public on board with a campaign. You're never going to get the entire public behind a campaign. The amount of investment you'd need to do that would be on the scale of one of the big brands out there.
Let's get everybody.
Exactly. It's nonsense. You need to be really specific about who it is that you're trying to get to support your campaign, like a subset of the public or political decision makers or corporate leaders or whoever it might be, and then really, really cater your insights to those audiences to understand them. And there are some great people out there and organizations out there who help guide you through that and help you to craft it in the most effective way possible. But to know them is to really be uncomfortable yourself and really to sit in their shoes, and that's your starting point.
Okay. And like some issues are trickier to campaign for because people aren't thinking about it, or it's not in front of their face. So I know surface against sewage, it's a very visceral topic. You can show people the pollution map, it's happening in the stream or the river. But for Oceana, that was happening in the ocean, and it wasn't necessarily something that they could see or feel that tangible impact for them. So how do you campaign on those issues? It's not in their face, and you don't have that opportunities.
Yeah, and I mean, with Surface Against Sewage is a great example because, of course, before they had the pollution map and all of that great stuff, no one knew about that either. So they've obviously found a way to then bring that in front of people, which is fantastic. It is, especially with ocean issues, it's super hard because unless you're by the sea or you care about the ocean and you love the ocean anyway, you're just not thinking about it. And it might be by chance you see an article in the paper or you see a David Attenborough documentary or something. I think, in terms of some things are luck, other things are in your control. Insights can really help you to feel a little bit more in control of that. So, like at Oceana, we found out some really great stuff about certain words, certain turns of phrase that would really attract people. Another thing, and this cuts across all issues, is drawing analogies between things in the ocean and things on land, that really kind of bring it home for people, but also talking about it in the context of human health, in terms of cost of living, the issues that they do care about. So, but you've got to test all of these things with the people you're trying to reach, and some things will work with some people, some things will work with the other, and you can't just like throw them out into the ether and hope that they'll land. You've got to try and test these things and get them. But with super cold audiences who have never heard of it, you've just got to be really realistic. And if you're really going to go for them, then you need a huge amount of investment.
Yeah.
So that comes back to funders. If they can give you lots and lots of money and lots of human resource, then you're better set up to be able to do that.
Or you've got to target the audience where you think you can have the biggest opportunity.
You always have to do that. That's a golden rule.
So I'm a stickler for planning. I love a good spreadsheet, Alyx.
Me too. Colour coding, all that.
Let's tell you what, we could do a whole episode on spreadsheet. Might do an episode on spreadsheets. Joel, if you're listening, podcast producer. What does meaningful campaign strategy actually include, though?
Yeah, a great question, and it's almost like an interview question actually for campaigners. You get asked this quite a lot when you're a campaigner. There are the fairly standard things I'm sure lots of your listeners are familiar with, in terms of having a clear goal, objectives, timeline, and budget. But I think that a couple of the things that get sadly overlooked or rushed quite often are a really robust theory of change. So essentially, how you're going to get from where you are now to where you want to be, step by step, and not vague and top line, but really digging into like actually what is needed. And that evolves over time, but you need to have something in place that can then be adapted. That's number one. And the other one is I hesitate to say it because it does sound dull, but it's really important, is KPIs, and having progress indicators as well as your impact indicators, so that you really can be seeing throughout time that you're making progress. Not only because then obviously you're making progress, but because you can report that upwards, you can report it to funders, and also you can see when you're not making progress. It really gives you the chance to say, what are we doing wrong? What do we need to change? Because there's a tendency to write a strategy that can be brilliant at the moment you write it, and within 3 months it's out of date because of the political context has changed, the funding's changed, your staffing has changed, whatever it might be, and you don't go back and look at it again. But having regular indicators that you come back to at least, every quarter and have a look at as a team together. And it can be 5 minutes or it can be an hour, whatever it takes, just to go back and check in and make sure that you're doing it right is so important to you actually delivering what you want to deliver. So those are two things I would say are the most important for me that regularly get overlooked.
Yeah. And why do some organisations skip that process? So, for me, strategy is always, we're testing a hypothesis.
Yeah.
That we've inferred with insight. And then strategy is the work that that you have to do to get there, and who does what and how it works and how it fits together. And why is that skipped?
I think there's often an impatience to deliver and pressure to deliver from people who perhaps aren't the campaigners.
Okay. Again,
I come back to sort of leadership and funders, but quite often, and board members, and maybe other organisations might seem to be progressing, and there's a bit of FOMO about, why aren't we? There can be multiple factors and pressure on organisations to be deliver. But actually, you can be delivering, but it can be super shallow, and it might look shiny, but it's actually not achieving in the long term what it is that you should and want to be achieving as an organisation. And that can really affect morale as well as long-term support of your organisation, right? Because I think people might see those things to start with, but then start to see through them a little bit. So I think and I am definitely not one for spending ages on planning, but I do think that we should be spending more time than we are on planning generally. You need the headspace for some really deep thinking together as a team to get it right. And like I said, to be able to come back to it in the future regularly. But if you crack it right at the start, then it's so much more rewarding and so much more successful than if you just try and quickly write something out and just tick it off and get on with it, in my experience. Yeah,
no, I'd concur. And how often should a campaign strategy be reviewed or refreshed?
In terms of the check-ins, like I said, I'd say look at it like every quarter if you can. Like look at just a quick check-in to see how you're progressing. In terms of a full-on review, I think it depends on the length of your campaign. But for example, right now for a charity, I'm helping them review and refreshing their campaign after 3 years. So they're not fundamentally changing it, but we did ask the questions at the very beginning of like, what's working, what isn't, do we need to change it? We don't, but we do need to refresh some areas. So, I'd say it does depend on the length of your campaign, but it's certainly healthy to do it every 2, 3 or 4 years. And as well, actually, I would say after a major event like a general election is super important as well.
Okay, yeah. So, strategy is a dynamic beast, and
absolutely,
it should evolve.
Should never just be shoved in a drawer.
No,
yeah, absolutely.
No. So, we're going to talk a little bit about coalitions and collaboration. You've said to me before that you were concerned that the sector wasn't investing enough in coalitions. Like together we're stronger. It felt a bit, fragmented.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I actually just attended the campaigning forum in Oxford a couple of weeks ago where I heard this even more from so many people, and there was such a demand for sessions on coalitions and how we can do it better. There's a real appetite for it right across the charity sector because, if you think about pooling resources, it's quite simple, really. If you think about pooling resources and the impact that you can have, not just in terms of your staff, but in terms of your supporter network and in terms of the investment you have together, you can achieve so much more. But I think that quite often organisations struggle to do this for a number of reasons, and some of them are completely understandable, but I think we need to work harder to push through them. So one is, as we said earlier, organisations have their own focuses. They have their own individual issues that they want to work on. And quite often when coalitions are built, they're seen as a tag-on. They're seen as extra work that are going to take your focus away. But actually, I kind of see it in a different way, which is that if you're starting a new campaign, always consider the value of, is there a coalition that should be built into this campaign from the beginning? Or is there an issue that we can't do on our own, and that we need to inspire a coalition in others, and not to be afraid to seek that out, not to be put off by the complexities of running coalitions, which undeniably are there, but ultimately can get you to your final goal in a much more powerful way. I think that the other thing is that sometimes puts organisations off is you will inevitably have to compromise. And, when you've got things under your control in your organisation, under your brand, you can be much more in control of what's said, exactly how it's said, and so on. And again, I have sympathy for that. But ultimately, what we're here for, and I'm sure many of your listeners are here for, is ocean protection. And it's the same across all sectors. It's not just specific to ours. That ultimately, there is space, there is a time and a place and a space for having those individual campaigns, absolutely. But there is also a huge missed opportunity, I think, for us to be working together a lot more in a much deeper, more meaningful way, to sort of loosen up a little bit on those sort of concerns about control and to genuinely put investment and time and resource into working together.
Yeah. Okay. I can, having seen some of those organisations, I can see why, just how busy they are. Why taking on or working with another organisation, if it's not built into the strategic roadmap, is going to be a tricky thing, certainly for operation and campaign teams to try and adopt.
Definitely, I think so. That there's a fear there around the complexity of it, but actually, if you did bake it into your campaign from the beginning, you very quickly see the benefits of it. Because you'd be thinking through the sort of theory of change of having a coalition.
You need to work with the People's Popular Front. No, the Popular People's Front. Which one are we? Okay, but
yes.
What does a successful coalition actually look like? How, let's paint that picture for anyone who's listening.
Yeah, so I mean, it clearly is, meaningful investment of time and staff that are all involved. There's got to be a sort of unwavering commitment to shared goals for the long term. transparency, which we've talked about before, like really great communication. You know, if an organization is feeling worried or is feeling uncomfortable, like there has to be transparency around that, and equality between the organizations, or equity between the organizations working together. And also, like, you know, volunteering time and staff towards those tasks that actually hold the coalition together. So whether it's the steering group or a secretariat or whatever form it takes. I think the other thing to remember is there are so many different types of coalition. There are some that are far more formal, that do have that kind of secretariat function. And then there are networks, alliances, there are just sort of WhatsApp groups. You know, there's a whole range of different ways that organizations can be working together. So it doesn't have to be overly complicated if that doesn't fit what you need. But ultimately, there just needs to be a shared sort of acknowledgement that that is the best way forward, and a real passion and commitment to actually doing it that way, and bringing the egos down a little bit helps, I think, as well.
So we'll just talk about KPIs and measuring success. So you did raise a point about the importance of meaningful KPIs. I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? How you design that, and how do you even approach that?
Yeah, it's tough. It can be tough, especially if you're, I think in some organizations it can be easier than others. I hesitate to say easy, but like if you have like a service delivery organization, then you tend to have functions that kind of can monitor exactly what you're delivering for people and how many people you're helping and so on. But in an ocean charity, for example, it's not so easy because the dolphins and fish don't sort of give you feedback on how you're doing. Although sort of human water users certainly would, which is great. There are so many different ways to get feedback and to get data, and of course it is very dependent on the issue you're campaigning on. But you know, you absolutely need to have your baseline, your target, how you're going to measure how you're going to measure it, and how frequently you're going to measure it, and having those progress indicators, like I said, is super important. So it's not just about the end result, but it is a discipline. It really is, and you have to have people in your organization who are up for it, who have done it before and can sort of guide you in that way, and the sort of the top down sort of expectation that you're going to report on those KPIs, because if there's no pressure to do that, then no one will bother doing them. Yeah. Okay. So that sort of is the infrastructure that you need around it, I think.
Yeah. And how do you measure that success beyond the policy announcement or the headline win?
Yeah, this is something we grapple with a lot in the ocean sector, certainly, and in the nature sector, I would say, actually, more widely, because ultimately what we all want to be able to report on or have KPIs on, right, is the impact in the real world, isn't it? Like, we want to be able to say the ocean's definitely healthier, the wildlife living in it are thriving, and so on. And how can we get that information? That data is pretty rare and difficult to get our hands on. But you know, there are ways to perhaps pilot it, to actually partner up with research organizations and go out there and pilot getting that information. There are organizations linked to government like CFAS and so on who are collecting some data. So just you're really mining as much as there is out there. Academic institutions who are doing research out there. There are some great partnerships you can establish in that way. I mean, it's a huge lift to expect anyone, especially an ocean charity, to be able to get all of the data that they would love to have. But we've got to try. We've got to try more than we are at the moment, because saying you've got a policy announcement or even a piece of legislation, that isn't the end result. Yep. Ultimately, it's a huge step forward, but it's not the end result. So I think we've got a ways to go in this sector when it comes to that. But there's definitely ways in.
Yeah, and we touched upon this before. It's not just about policy announcement and headline win. It's about what happens next, monitoring, enforcement, implementation. So important, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely, because that's what we're all here for, is to make sure that the change that we've achieved at policy or legislative level is actually making a difference out in the ocean, and life is getting better out there. And you can't do that without monitoring and enforcement and long-term commitment to that. So it's unfortunately it's not looked at as much as it should be, but I'm always delighted when I see that, because it's so super important. Yeah,
have a plan for it. If not, speak to somebody who knows how to do that stuff.
Exactly.
Give you some advice. I don't know. Maybe you could talk to another organisation who is doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And academic institutions, they're collecting data all the time.
Go.
There's so many out there.
Great coalitions. Just looking ahead, what do you think the campaigning sector needs to get better at over the next decade?
I mean, I've mentioned a couple. So collaboration, I would say definitely insights work. Digital innovation's another huge one, it cuts across all different industries. But I think one that I'm also deeply passionate about, and I'd love to mention now, is DEI, particularly in our sector, in the ocean sector. It extends across the environment sector as a whole, actually. But we need to be much, much better at reaching out to audiences who don't normally engage on ocean protection. But, it's an incredibly white middle class issue. This absolutely needs to change. We need to hear from different voices, and we won't ever reach everyone who we could be working with unless people see themselves represented in the work that we're doing. And I know that there are some great people out there, including Yvette Curtis at SAS and many others who are pioneering this within our sector. And I'd encourage people to follow her and others doing this work and really get involved in the DEI side, because there's a mountain to climb, but I know that we can do it, and it's incredibly important for the future of our sector that we really invest in that and really spend time on that in the future.
Okay, fantastic. And because we are looking ahead, we had an AI expert, Mary Kemp, on in this series.
Great.
Have you seen the impact of AI tools or how people are receiving campaigns change as a result of this technology?
It's super interesting. I'm actually running a session on this next month. I run something called the Campaigning Leadership Forum. So any leadership campaigning leaders out there, we'd like to join that. Feel free to get in touch. It's so vast, that topic, in terms of how we could be using it as organizations, how supporters and other decision makers might be receiving information, tackling dis and misinformation. I feel like we're at the very beginning of that journey. I feel like the amount of insight and expertise that we need is not there at all yet in our sector, not compared to sort of big brands and corporates who have obviously the money to invest in that. I am personally sort of at the beginning of that journey as well, trying to understand how that works and how we can best support campaigners in tackling that and understanding that. So I'd be fascinated to hear more about that in our sector in the future. It's a complicated one, but slightly terrifying, but also I think there's lots of opportunity in that for sure. Yeah. It's
as I think I said in the episode with Mary, it's a runaway train, and we're all trying to run to get onto it. So.
Yeah, on human legs. Yeah.
So, if a young campaigner is starting today, what would you tell them to focus on learning first?
I think follow as many of the charities you support as possible. Don't be held to just one. Follow the charities that you support and the causes you support. Take their actions. Learn as much as you can about all the different ways that organisations are campaigning. The quieter ways, the louder ways, and everything in between. See what you like. See what fits you and your personality, and just absorb. Be a sponge as much as you can. Is my advice at this point.
Fantastic, and don't forget to ask those questions of your audience. To real humans.
Absolutely, and tell your boss you need to do that too.
Yeah. Okay, well, sadly we've come to the end of the episode, which is also the end of the series. So you've been a fabulous guest, Alyx. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your insights. If you could just give us what action people listening today could take to support ocean campaigns or better advocacy work.
Yeah. Go online right now, find an ocean charity and take an action they're asking you to take. That is the number one thing you can do. Honestly, we need lots of people taking action, signing up for emails so that we know you're there to support us. Okay, brilliant. Thank you for that. Nice and simple, but impactful. Definitely. Fabulous. That's the end of the 6th episode. So the end of the series. I'll see you next time. Thanks, Alyx. Thanks for having me. Thanks for listening to A Drop in the Ocean, helping us all amplify our impact. New episodes will be available from your streaming platform of choice.
please like, review and share to help us spread these messages. See you next time.